Today I want to talk about the idea of why a person is like a chariot. This is a very well-known Buddhist metaphor that questions whether a person actually exists in the way that we think they do. The reason I'm so drawn to this example is because before reading this, before ever knowing this example, I sort of had an idea of myself. I thought of myself a certain way. But as I kept reading and trying to understand what the monk was actually saying, something radical happened. Something shifted in me. And I don't think I ever saw myself the same way again. Like, I couldn't really go back to seeing myself the same way. And I hope this video does the same thing for you. If you've never heard of this metaphor or never read this example, I will put the book in the description where you can read it and see it for yourself. Welcome to the video, everyone. My name is Deb, and let's get started. So, this idea comes from a dialogue between a king named Milinda and a Buddhist monk named Nagasena. This whole dialogue is set in a time after Alexander the Great's expansion into parts of the Indian subcontinent, when Greek and Indian philosophical traditions were sort of intersecting. Now, nobody really knows if this conversation actually happened in a literal historical sense, but that doesn't really matter because this example is mentioned, as far as I know, in all of Intro to Buddhism books and widely known among Buddhist philosophers. Before I start, I also wanted to mention how back in the day, kings weren't just rulers. They had this deep philosophical seeking of the nature of reality. They actively looked for wisdom. They would sit with philosophers, monks, and thinkers and ask questions about life, about its existence, about truth, about God, etc., etc. You see this even in ancient Hindu texts like the Upanishads, where most of the stories come from when kings would host these discussions and debates about the nature of reality. And all sorts of philosophers, geniuses, saints, and monks would come from all over the world to have these debates and dialogues. So this conversation is really a snapshot of that kind of a world where questioning existence was taken seriously, I would say, unlike now, where everybody seems to have developed their own ideas and everybody has a solid foundation of what reality is, even though scientists still don't know what consciousness is. Anyway, so let's get into the conversation. The conversation begins with Nagasena, the monk, introducing himself. But he introduces himself in a way that immediately disrupts everything. He says that my name is Nagasena, but then he follows it by saying that this is just a name, a label that is used for convenience. And underneath that name, there is no actual person to be found. He is saying that Nagasena is not actually a person. And that's obviously a very unsettling thing to hear, right? Because we assume that when we say I, we're pointing to somebody, to something that's existing. But he's saying that there is no such person that exists. And the king, Milinda, reacts exactly how we would react to it. He's confused, almost taken aback by the claim, and he's questioning everything. He's like, Nagasena, how can you say that there is no person? Then who am I talking to right now? Who is thinking? Who is speaking? Who is acting? If there is no person, then who is responsible for actions? Who experiences consequences? Who learns? Who grows? Who changes? And these are exactly the same questions I had when I first read it. Because it feels intuitive, right? That if you remove the idea of a person, everything seems to collapse. Morality, identity, responsibility, even the conversation itself. If there is no person, how can a conversation, a debate be had by that person? Because the entire structure of life depends on there being a someone. Now, instead of answering directly, Nagasena introduces a metaphor. He says that a person is like a chariot. Now, obviously that doesn't make any sense to the king, so he starts breaking it down step by step. He asks the king, what is a chariot? Is the pole a chariot? The king says no. Is the axle the chariot? The king says no. Are the wheels the chariot? Is the frame that you see, is that the chariot? And he keeps going on and on. He says, are the reins, the yoke, the flagstaff, are any of these things individually the chariot? And the king says, no, they're not. Then Nagasena asks, he says then, okay then, what is the chariot then? If none of its parts are the chariot, and the word itself isn't the chariot, the sound isn't the chariot, right? Then what are you actually referring to when you say the chariot? So what he's trying to say and point at is that a chariot is nothing more than a collection of its parts, right? It is nothing but the wheels, the flagstaff, the reins, everything arranged in a certain way, and we give it a label because it's convenient. It's convenient to give a label to that arrangement. But there is no separate chariot-like thing, a chariot essence that exists beyond those parts, inside of the chariot. Like if you take it apart, you won't find the chariotness anywhere. You will just find its components. If you take the wheel by itself, you wouldn't call it the chariot. So where did the chariotness go? It was never the chariot to begin with. Does that make sense? This is where it becomes personal. Now the king asks for more metaphors and analogies because that's the easiest way to understand these sorts of concepts. And I love ancient philosophy because they use a hell lot of metaphors. And I love that. I love that. So Nagasena goes on to say that a human being is exactly like that. Exactly like a chariot. What we call a person is just a collection of different elements, different clusters. Your body, your sensations, perceptions, habits, and your consciousness. They use these 5 clusters and they come together in a certain way, and we give that arrangement a name for convenience sense. But underneath that name, there is no fixed permanent self that you can call you or I. There is no unchanging you that exists independently of these components. For example, if you amputate your leg, you still are you, and you don't have the leg as a part of you. So was that leg you? No, because the leg is gone, but you are still existing. So the leg was never you. Then he uses a couple more examples to make this even clearer. He says that a flame burning through the night, it looks continuous, like the same flame. But in reality, it's constantly changing. Think about it, the flame from one moment to the next is not the same. It appears to be the same, but it is not the same flame. You look at it and you consider it, you call it the same flame, but is it? The flame at second 1 is not the same flame as at second 10. He also says that milk turning into curd, curd into butter, butter into ghee. At each stage, something changes. But there's a connection, right? But besides that connection, there is nothing fixed. There is no something eternal that exists. And that's how life works. It's a flowing process. So when you start questioning your own identity, like what are you really? You realize that you are nothing. Because are you in your body? But your body changes constantly. You are not the same height, the same build when you were 5 years old. Cells die and regenerate like every 6 years or so. I'm not sure. But you can lose parts of yourself, just like I explained. You can lose your arm, you can lose your leg, but you still feel like yourself. So you're not just the body. Are you your thoughts? Your personality? No, because your thoughts change too, radically. Your personality changes too. What you believe, let's say 5 years ago, might be extremely different from what you believe to be true now. So if everything about you is changing, then what exactly is this I that you feel so certain about? What is this I that you keep referring to? And this is where it gets really confusing because even after removing all that, there still feels like there's something else. Like, even if you're not body, your thoughts, there's still this sense of presence. Think about it. For example, people in comas, they're not actively thinking, but they are still there. Consciousness is not you as well. Like, the conscious mind is not you as well. Because a person in coma is not thinking. Their brain, their mind is not working. But there's still something there. What is that thing that seems to remain when everything else is changing? So the Buddhist idea is basically saying that you are like a chariot, which is like a mechanism, right? The body, the thoughts, the identity, the habits, the consciousness, everything lets you have this experience of life. But you are not the one running. You're not the chariot. You're not the mechanism itself. And this is where I would say my own idea, which I gain from other philosophical ideas like the Upanishads and Hindu philosophy and idealism. I'm going to talk about all of those things in upcoming videos, but I think the awareness that is observing this mechanism is you. The thing that is aware of the body changing, the thoughts changing, the identity shifting, the awareness aware of everything that is unchanging, something that is formless, something that is everlasting, that is always there and it always has been there. That is you. This is where I connected to Vedanta, which is what I'm going to talk about in the next video, because they also have a chariot metaphor. So many chariot metaphors and examples everywhere, because I feel like they were just obsessed with chariots back in the day. And it's like the coolest thing, I guess. But yeah, it goes one step further, and it says that you are not the chariot, but the passenger of the chariot. And I love this idea because this complements and ties into Buddhism so perfectly. It makes so much sense. It makes me feel like, yes, I've discovered it all. But yeah, but this also should make you question, what is this I that we feel like? What is this then? And that is what we call the ego. This identity that we hold on to so tightly, that is not so solid as we think, is the ego. And to be honest, back in the day, I didn't realize what ego death was. People talk about ego death a lot of the time, and it sounded very abstract and ridiculous, to be honest. But I have had an ego death. I did, and I am extremely excited to talk about that story in some other video. But it completely changes how you see everything when you experience something like an ego death. And it's not just a theory, it's something you can actually experience, and I am so grateful to have experienced that. I didn't even realize it when it happened. And I actually was on a substance when it happened, so I'm going to tell you the whole story. But you can also experience ego death while meditating and being in the void state. There's so many things. But the main idea that I wanted to talk about here is that the person that you think is so fixed, the person that is growing old, the person that is fat, thin, this, that isn't a fixed thing. That doesn't exist. That's not you. It exists like a mechanism, but that's not you. It's a collection. It's a process. And we just label it for convenience, because you can't refer to me unless you call me Deb. But that doesn't mean I am Deb. I am the awareness that's aware of Deb. When you're thinking, you will notice that there's always something that's listening. This is how you know that all these bad thoughts you have sometimes, because, if you have OCD or something, you get several conflicting ideas and thoughts, and you wonder what is you. And the answer is nothing is you. And that's what I talked about in the last video as well, if you watched that one. So yeah, I don't think there is anything eternal about that you, that is the you that you think you are. It doesn't even exist, so it can never even end. I think this is a very difficult idea to understand. It's not something you fully understand at one go. But I think if you sit with the question and as you experience life, you observe it. Slowly, it gets to you as you experience it. As you know, experience is the best teacher. So if you are confused, ask questions and observe. Because when you observe that you are not this you, you're thinking, for sure, yes. But that thinking is the echo from everything you've learned, everything the world has taught you, everything you hear in media, from your family members, from your friends. It's an echo. The thoughts are just echoes. But what's you is the awareness, the one that's listening. And it's honestly a relief. Because then you don't have any problems, no mental health issues, nothing's wrong with you. There might be stuff with the body, but that body isn't necessarily you. And I feel like the closer we get to the eternal we, the thing that we don't really know, the thing that doesn't have thoughts like we do, like the ego does, the closer we get to that, the more satisfied or at peace we feel with life. Nothing's that serious. Nothing. We take life so seriously as if it's just this one thing we are and will always be that. No. We can be anything. We can be anything at any time, whatever we want, whatever our mind, this consciousness wants to be. Because we are just aware of it, right? We just need to be aware of it. Yeah, so that's what I wanted to talk about today. I hope it makes sense. And if it doesn't, ask questions. Because the more questions you ask, the more opportunity both of us will get to delve into this topic a lot better and really feel it. Be one with it. Be one with the I. And if there is one I, then you and I are the same I. No, now it's getting too confusing. So I'll talk about that, how you and I are the same, in another video. That's it for today, and I will see you guys in the next video.